Morning, everyone. We're just going to give everyone a few minutes to join.
Good morning, everyone. I'm just going to do a quick intro for the ladies. Welcome to this morning's Knowledge Bank. Today's webinar is going to be hosted by Annie McGrandles, Head of Portfolio and Block Management at Property Management Recruitment. And he's also going to be joined by Jennifer Lemen, who is co-founder of Property Elite. The ladies are going to be discussing block management and in particular how to navigate the pathway to MRICS. If you've got any questions throughout the session, then please put them in the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen here, and we will try to get through as many as we can at the end of the session. The webinar is also being recorded and will be available later today via the News on the Block YouTube channel. I will also send you all a link via email to the recording and also to the slides. That's all from me. I'm now going to pass you over to Annie and Jen to begin the session.
Morning, everyone. I'm really pleased there's been a great sign up to this session, and it's clear that everybody's committed to their training. And we're going to have a look at the RICS accreditation today, and particularly the step-by-step process for block managers. So we're lucky enough to have Jen on the webinar today. She is an expert in all things APC. And runs a training academy to support people through APC, and she can discuss that in detail later. I just also want to thank PMR for facilitating this for us, as well as News on the Block. So I'm just going to move over. So as we mentioned, this is Jen and I, some pictures, and I'd like to give you a bit more information on Jen. If you might know me, I used to work in block management. I had a block management company, Burlington Estates, for around 15 years. I carried out lots of training during my time at Burlington, in particular my MRICS, and hopefully Jen will be helping me with my FRICS shortly. So a little bit about Jen that you might not know. So Jen is co-founder of Property Elite. She is a RICS APC assessor, and she's also the author of How to Become a Chartered Surveyor. That's a published book that you can obtain to have a look at. She's also an experienced property consultant as well. So she's FRICS status, a RICS registered valuer, and a RICS accredited mentor as well. She's got 15 years experience working in the commercial sector. So she's experienced in providing training to students for the RICS, ASSOT RICS, APC, and also, as I said, the FRICS candidates as well. She works with corporate clients as well as individuals, and she's a senior lecturer at the University of the West of England and the University of Portsmouth, and an associate tutor at the University College of Estate Management. So she's a very busy lady. Her RICS assessment experience includes sitting on APC interview panels and as a preliminary review assessor. Jen?
Thank you.
I mean, I also see you a lot on the RICS website, putting a lot of information on the RICS Property Journal as well, writing APC columns for particular property magazines. But there's a lot to cover, Jen. Anything in particular I've missed?
No, I think that's a very good summary. So thank you. Perfect.
So I'll hand you then to start having a look at the RICS membership levels.
Lovely. So thank you everybody for attending today, and hopefully wherever you are on your professional journey, whether you're fairly new or whether you're an older hand at block management, I'll be able to tell you a little bit more about how you can advance your career in terms of the RICS framework. RICS have 3 levels of membership, starting with Associate RICS, leading into MRICS and then FRICS. Associate RICS is a more vocational qualification that doesn't necessarily require a degree. generally between 0 and 4 years experience. As you become more experienced, RICS require less in terms of qualifications. So associate RICS can be a very doable qualification and relates very specifically one of the pathways to residential block management. Moving through to MRICS, this is kind of the gold standard for chartered surveyors and allows you to call yourself a chartered surveyor. FRICS is then the next step up from that and requires more involvement in the industry, more recognition, so other things apart from the core technical role of being a block manager or a surveyor. Today we'll primarily be looking at MRICS, but if you do have any questions or queries on the other two sides of this, then more than happy to pick that up individually. Next slide. So what is the APC? The APC stands for Assessment of Professional Competence, and this is the process that you go through to become MRICS. So once you've passed your APC, you can then call yourself a chartered surveyor. The basis for the APC is it means that you're sufficiently competent and professional in the job that you're doing. So obviously, as a block manager, you're competent and professional in block management. Annie will tell you later on about the residential pathway. For the APC, you have an area of practice. So as a block manager, you would sit within residential, and you'll find that in some cases, you might need to look slightly wider at your experience or manage to fit that into what the RICS want to see. As we're talking about pathways, when you go through the APC, this is based on meeting a number of competencies at 3 levels. I'll tell you more about those levels, but effectively they come from level 1 being knowledge, all the way up to level 3, which is giving reasoned advice to a client. The last part of this slide is about routes and pathways, and it can be slightly confusing, especially when you read the RICS guidance, to understand what these mean. Pathway just means your area of practice, so residential, and route is a little bit different, which just effectively means the way that you get through the APC. So that's based on your qualifications and your experience. Next slide. So this is a fairly helpful diagram from RICS, and they actually produce this if you're already associate RICS. And today I'll just be talking you through some of the different routes that you might be eligible for to become MRICS. If you're already an associate, there may be a couple of different ways for you to get qualified. The main challenge is where you don't already have a degree. RICS, a different pathway, a different route, depending on if you have an RICS accredited degree or a degree that has absolutely nothing to do with block management or surveying. So you might have, for example, done a music degree or a business degree. And actually that's really, really helpful when it comes to becoming MRICS. If you're already an associate and do not have a degree, RICS have what they call a study hours route, where you effectively pick up hours and modules from the last year of an accredited degree. This route is under consideration for change by RICS. So I just say that if you don't have a degree already, it's worth keeping an eye on what happens, because I'd say it's fairly likely that RICS will be making some changes to make it easier for you to find a route to become MRICS. Next slide. So the APC itself is structured in 2 parts of the assessment. You have a final written submission that you send to RICS. You have an assessment panel who then take this, and then they conduct a 1-hour interview based on that. You'll see on the left-hand side here that I've got a box saying prelim review and structured training. I just explain the significance of this. So if you already have an RICS accredited degree, this is generally one of the more simple ways of becoming qualified. If you have that accredited degree and between 0 and 5 years experience, you will be on what RICS call 24 months structured training. That 24 months becomes 12 months if you have between 5 and 10 years experience, and the requirement for structured training drops away with over 10 years experience. If you have a degree that is not IRCS accredited, so something that's completely different, like that music or that business degree, when you have over 5 years experience, you can then look at what we call preliminary review. All that means is that before you submit for final assessment, you have an extra written assessment that goes to IRCS, and then they say yes or no that you're at the standard ready to go forwards. So with a degree, depending on if it is IRCS accredited or not, you have different ways of becoming qualified. Every single person who goes through the APC has to do the written piece of work and the interview. Next slide. This is what I mentioned when I said about if you're already an associate or don't have a degree, just useful to know about the timeline here, which could be later this year or 2024, which should give more options for a non-degree route, but there's nothing yet published by IRCS.
Jen, just on that point, just to add, and I think most people on the call will be aware of this, if you achieve MIRPM, so you achieve your member status through IRPM, that does give you an entry into MRICS as well. So by just doing the ethics test, you can be becoming MRICS.
Brilliant, yes. So we've just mentioned if you don't have a degree, and this SPA stands for Senior Professional Assessment. If you're a block manager, perhaps a director of a firm, and actually more of your time is spent managing a team, leading a team, then the Senior Professional Assessment may be a really, really good route for you. So if you own or run a company, this may well be for you. If you don't have a degree, that's fine. You just need 10 years of experience in the industry, and that experience doesn't all have to be in a management role. That could be technical block management work before that, or wider residential work. If you do have a degree, a relevant postgrad degree, that 10 years is reduced to 5 years. So this gives a great non-degree option for managers in residential. A really key part of this is showing that you have advanced responsibilities as a senior leader. And I'll be telling you a bit more about how the process will work if you think that the Senior Professional Assessment may be a good fit for you. We work with lots of residential surveyors, property managers, block managers who've found that the Senior Professional Assessment is actually a really, really good fit for them. And it really lets you emphasize, if you're running a company, those aspects of business strategy, team management, HR, absolutely loads of things that will be second nature to you. Next slide.
Just to let you know, we are going to be doing questions at the end, but we are watching them as they come through.
Lovely. So this slide here just tells you more about the Senior Professional Assessment. You'll also see at the top that I put the word specialist. RICS have another assessment similar to Senior Professional called Specialist. And this is where you're working in a very niche area of practice. So if you are a block manager with a very specific role and you feel that actually the wider technical competencies are difficult to satisfy because you've become so specialised, the specialist route may be something to look at. It's only really relevant to, I'd say, fewer people than the other routes. So if you think that that might be a good fit, I'd suggest getting in contact after today's session. Senior Professional is slightly different to the structured training and prelim review routes because RICS have an initial eligibility and vetting stage. Basically, you submit a CV and a 400-word profile to RICS saying why you fit in that route. So saying why you're a leader, you manage people and you manage resources. RICS then give you a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Obviously, if it's a thumbs up, you can then enroll on Senior Professional. And then you still have to go through the stages of a written assessment and an interview. The nature of the submission and the interview are different to the other routes. So I will explain the differences as we go on, but it's just worth bearing in mind that they are different. I mentioned the professionalism module. For associate and all of the APC routes, you have to undertake the professionalism module, and actually it's just a really good way to get to grips with the standards that the RICS ask us to uphold. So we've touched on pathway guides. These are all available on the RICS website, and there's actually 22 in total. The one relevant, I would think, to everybody here would be residential. If you do look at associate RICS, they separate out residential into a number of sub-pathways. So residential management, residential estate agency, and residential valuation and surveying. So it's just important to make sure that you're looking at the right one. The pathway guide that you choose needs to be related to your career experience and really the role that you're doing now. So perhaps if you've come from a lettings background into block management, you would be looking at either the residential property management for associate or just straightforward residential for the APC. If you are interested in doing the APC, I'd say go and download that pathway guide after today's session, and it will give you a really good idea of the types of experience that you'll need and that Annie will be talking to you about shortly. So for the APC final submission, and this is for the prelim review and structured training routes, so not the senior professional assessment, there's a couple of different things that you have to do to be able to submit. There's generally 3 key written elements. So you have a summary of experience, and based on the competencies that we've mentioned in your pathway, you have to write basically a statement saying what you know, and then another statement talking about your experience. So these are really, really specific examples in the past tense and the first person. So it could be for property management, I managed a block in X, and the things that I did were X, Y, and Z. I gave advice to my client on something else. There's also a case study, and this is a really in-depth project, really in-depth report on one particular instruction. So it could be one aspect of block management, it could be a particular issue within a wider instruction, it could even be onboarding a new management client. This will relate to your competencies again and look at 2 or 3 really key challenges that you encountered, and then how you advise the client on overcoming those. You then have a CPD record, and this is generally for a 12 or a 24-month period for the period for 12 months before you submit your documents. There's lots of requirements about the CPD record that I'll briefly mention later on. At the bottom here, you see other, and that includes your professionalism module and the structured training diary if you are on that route. And that basically is just a summary of the day-to-day work that you're doing allocated to your different competencies. So competency choice. And Annie, do you want me to do a quick summary and then I'll hand over to you to look at the specifics? Lovely. So every single pathway has a set of mandatory competencies that, whether you're a residential surveyor, a building surveyor, a valuer, doesn't matter, everybody has to do this set of mandatory competencies. And these are really your core business skills, so things like client care and health and safety. You'll then see in the residential pathway that you have to choose technical competencies, and these are split into a list of core technical competencies, and you have a fairly limited choice over these, but these are the core skills a residential surveyor needs, and then optional technical competencies. The optional technical competencies are wider in scope. So, for example, if we take residential as the pathway and then filter it down to a block manager, your optional technical competencies will probably be much more relevant to block management, whereas say a residential valuer would choose very different optional competencies to a block manager. So, as a block manager, you might be looking at things like property management or maintenance management. Next slide. Every single competency is split up into 3 levels. The pathway guide will tell you the level that you need to achieve. The mandatory competencies have very set levels. The technical competencies, you have some choice over whether you achieve level 2 or level 3. Level 1 is about what you know. So for property management, it could be, I understand the RICS guidance, I understand how to manage a property with tasks including X, Y, and Z. When you take it to level 2, this is you undertaking, let's say, block management work in practice. So you've got a specific example of when you've managed a block. At level 3, you're taking it a step further, and the examples would be where you've given advice directly to the client. So if you've encountered a repair issue or an issue with rent payments, perhaps, how did you deal with it? What advice did you give? And what was the outcome? Level 3 is kind of the pinnacle of the APC, and it's what you need to achieve over some of the most important competencies on your residential pathway. In terms of competency choice, when you come to look at the pathway guide, the real key to getting competency choice right is that it reflects your current role and perhaps some of your past experience, and you've got a good bank of examples to choose from. Sometimes being more experienced actually makes life more difficult because you have to cherry pick out the very best examples. It can be very tempting to choose really complex instructions or property management issues, for example, but actually keeping things really simple will help. The bar for the APC, I suppose, would be set as a graduate 2 years out of university, rather than perhaps somebody with 10 or 15 years experience. So you need to show that basically you're competent, and if it's level 3, you're giving advice. But the interview is just an hour long, and the submission has some quite tight word count. So physically and actually being able to relay information is quite difficult. So keeping it simple avoids misunderstandings and just gives you the best chance of hitting that bar in terms of advice or doing. So the mandatory competencies, these are the competencies, as I said, that everybody has to do. Where it says level 3, that needs to be giving advice. Where you see level 2, that needs to be examples of you doing. So client care could be agreeing a service level agreement and then updating the client. Where there's no level, these are all just level 1. So you don't actually need experience of, let's say, dispute resolution, but you do need knowledge. So, you know, business planning, I'm aware of my firm's business plan, you know, key elements include X, Y, and Z. Same for accounting. It's just knowledge rather than practical experience. The pathway guide actually sets out what you need to know and what you need to have done for all of these. And then actually on the next slide, if we just flick onto that one, actually, the pathway guide also tells you everything you need to know or have done at levels 2 and 3. And I'll hand over to Annie now.
Yeah, so just touching on what Jen said, I guess the key thing to this is to download the guide. If you're starting on your journey now, to download the guide, to have a look at some of the competencies and start to think about where you're practicing and if you're getting these experiences in your current role, or if not, try and get exposure into these experiences. Also just thinking about the RICS interview as you get to that process. The worst thing that you can do in terms of your RICS interview or submission is talk about something which you don't know and is outside your skill set. That's a big no-no. So what you got to do is think about what's actually in your remit and what you actually do have a strong knowledge on. Don't guess at anything. So looking at the core competencies, some of the key ones that we can in block management is easily housing maintenance, repairs and improvements, housing strategies. I know that a lot of people that are involved in mobilisations of sites have got some strong understanding on that. Inspection, that's one that we all have to undertake. And even as we get into more senior positions, inspections are still there. It's still part of our role, whether it be a new business right the way through to kind of auditing. Legal and regulatory compliance is a core competency in block management, and one that we should be able to cover off easily. I'm going to go to measurement and valuation afterwards because I know there's a lot of questions around this. But property management, again, is something that we're able to do. So choosing 2 to level 3, so one that you can give advice on. So thinking about housing maintenance, repairs and improvements, you can give your knowledge, you can give your experience, exactly, you might have done a 10-year plan, and then you can give reasoned advice to the client about why they need to go on and undertake those repairs. You might categorize them, for example, in your submission to say what's necessary today and what could be left for perhaps 3 months and what could be put in next year's budget. That's advice, and that will bring you to level 3. So it's 2 to level 3 and 2 to level 2 within these core competencies. Jen, anything else you want to add on that? Oh, you're muted, sorry.
I'm just going to unmute myself. No, I think probably, yeah, just the key one just to think about is how you can take out the valuation and the appraisal advice from your block management work. I know that a lot of residential candidates panic because they're not doing valuation work in a valuation department, and actually there are lots and lots of lovely ways that you can pull out advice on rent. It could be lettings. There's loads of different ways that you can pull out your own experience into valuation. It doesn't necessarily need to be a barrier.
Yeah, I think for us in block management, insurance valuation. So every 3 years we have to undertake insurance valuations for our blocks under our ICS guidance. So, we can be involved in those and shadowing those. If you have an estate agency arm, you can go through and do the comparable valuations with them. And if you're working for a developer, which I know some people on the calls are, might be able to shadow or be part of a team that do sort of residual valuation of development of land. So there are options about doing valuation within block management. I know people that did APC when I was working at Burlington went off and actually, separate to when we merged with an estate agent, but went off and actually took experience and days with estate agencies to work on valuation. So if you start to think about this, you can actually build it into your APC and demonstrate it. And while we're here, we are going to go on to this, but on measurement, it's the same again. So thinking about whether you've been part of anything like drafting plans, which are now required for the Fire Safety Act. So the changes in regulations are going to require new plans to be drafted. They might help us with measurement there, and you can demonstrate that. You also may have, you might be working for some RMCs that need to maybe do lease extensions, or part of freeholders doing lease extensions, and they need plans to be submitted into land registry. So you can be part of that. Or it could be even for measurement for apportionment. So looking at anything which you may have to do in terms of mobilisation of sites. Or potentially that I know in my experience, we had times where leaseholders required us to check certain areas they might have bought space and to increase apportionments in terms of service charge. So there are some ideas about measurement and valuation that you can demonstrate. So these are optional technical competencies. So coming down the list here, conflict avoidance management and dispute is a good one to be able to demonstrate. Obviously, you need to know the dispute resolution processes, but also you can look at your own company complaints procedures, and in block management, everybody knows about conflict avoidance. So you've also got data management. So thinking about your systems with the new golden thread, have you had to be involved in any way in bringing a new IT software on board, or learning about that and managing that to be able to work in the new legislation? Landlord and tenant, this is something that we can demonstrate definitely well, and it's in all aspects of our roles. Maintenance management, again, so putting out a maintenance plan across the portfolios that you're working on. And as I mentioned before, showing that you can decide which ones are urgent, which ones need to be required in 3 months and a year, how you've done them within your budget. That's what you can cover off in maintenance management. And then of course you've got supplier management as well. So I'm just picking out the very core easy ones as block managers that we do day in and day out. So this is valuation. Jen, I know that this is where you are very strong, so I'm going to let you step in. But again, I'm happy to chat through some of the examples that I've got for block managers to do this.
Yeah, lovely. So, so obviously valuation to level 2 will probably be the most achievable. Only really where you're doing valuation work day in, day out will level 3 be the right option. As Annie said, valuation at level 2 can be going and doing a short secondment, a week or 2. It can be going to work with somebody else in another department to build up your experience. And ideally, either through a couple of examples of involvement in different stages of different valuation or appraisal exercises, you'll understand the process from start to finish. So that initial terms of engagement phase, the research and the due diligence, the comparable evidence analysis, obviously then reporting to the client. And there are so many different ways that you can do that. We obviously have the RICS Red Book as the framework for valuing. It may be fairly unlikely that you'll have had an experience of a full Red Book valuation, because most of the purposes we've talked about would be accepted from BPS 1 to 5 of the Red Book. So you basically have to adhere to parts of the Red Book, the first 2 that mean that you act independently without conflicts of interest, but your valuation has more flexibility, let's say, in how you report and what you do. And yeah, I just say 2 very specific examples of being involved in valuation work will be what you need to write this up to the right level. Perfect. Yeah.
So looking at summary of experience.
Lovely. So we've talked about the summary of experience, but just the key thing to pick out for you is actually the word counts. The RICS set word counts that you can't even go a word over, and you're left with between 150 to 200 words per level per competency. That'll be slightly less at your level 1s and more where you go to level 3. It's actually worth just trying to write out, let's say, 200 words on 2 examples. It could be a property management, and actually just see for yourself how short they are. It's really about setting the scene and explaining what happened, but a lot of the in-depth questioning will come from the assessors in your interview. So they pick up your work and will go, well, what did you do? What did you advise? And that's where the real depth of detail will come in. But the summary of experience basically forms the basis of what you'll be asked about in interview. Next slide.
I'd just say on the competencies, they've got a really good information. So if you take them and read them, I used to do this. I'd read one on the tube, and then I'd be able to almost write the 150 words on the tube, just each day picking the different competencies, because actually the information that RICS provides is a really good framework on how you can demonstrate it. So by bringing each competency paperwork from RICS and then just approaching them one by one across a period of time, it's actually bite-sized chunks gets it done.
Great advice. Preliminary review, just a brief comment if it's relevant to you. The prelim review is exactly the same format, submission as the final assessment. You just submit it for that initial review by RICS and then submit it again, making some changes if relevant. So there's nothing to panic about. There's just a big focus on proofreading, content and structure, but it doesn't mean that you're writing 2 completely separate submissions. This is probably a slide to come back to, and actually works really well with what Annie mentioned about writing up your competencies. If you're on structured training, you have to keep a diary of your experience, and that's relevant to only your technical competencies. You don't actually submit this, it's just the total days per level per competency that feeds through into your final submission. And really it's a tool for you, not for anybody else. And then you can obviously put examples in there that you then pick out for your final submission. The case study, just worth mentioning here, again with a specific word count. It's a project that you've been personally involved in, and actually the really key thing to it is something that interests you, you know, something that you enjoyed working on. It's going to be with you for a fairly long time throughout the APC process. So it's got to be something that you enjoy talking about. It shows that you are competent, and it focuses on at least 2 to 3 technical competencies with advice given at level 3.
So just on this, a couple of examples of some of the APC case studies that I've seen. They involve major work, so setting out a 10-year program, having a maintenance program that they might have use their software to be part of that. So, you know, the major works has been is such a big project. It involves health and safety you can bring into it, and also all the time you've got client advice. You're going back to the client as well, so you can push it up to that level 3. So I've seen quite a lot around that subject for block managers.
So CPD record for everybody. If you're already qualified on another body, then it's likely that you'll be keeping a CPD record. The CPD just has to be relevant to the technical competencies, which, you know, if it relates to block management or residential in a wider sense, it will be. Key thing here is that 50% of the total must be formal. So those are things where you're maybe learning in a group. It's a very structured learning with some outcomes, and RICS on their website have a great diagram showing exactly what formal and informal CPD is. If you're already an associate, your CPD record is completely separate. It's recorded in a separate platform, and it's based on a different recording year. So it's just worth bearing that in mind.
On this as well, a lot of the RICS do provide CPD training that you can buy, that you might want to look at if you are trying to get an employer to sponsor this. One thing is that if you do CPD training, you will be questioned on it in your interview. So don't pick something really complex to do CPD training on that you're not going to be able to remember afterwards. And also the IRPM newsletters can count as informal CPD.
Brilliant. So the senior professional submission is just slightly different to what we mentioned. The 2 key things. So case studies are 3 1,500-word case studies, 1 on you as a senior manager and 2 on technical instructions. So that could be similar to the examples Annie mentioned for block management work. The CPD is 20 hours, not 48 hours minimum as well. So a really key thing to mention is who supports you through the APC. The mandatory role that RICS prescribe is what we call the counsellor. And this is somebody who has to be M or FRICS qualified. And they basically support you through the process and then sign you off at the end. RICS recommend possibly an hour meeting every 3 months. So it's really important that you find somebody who's going to be committed to actually give you that time to help you through the process. I'd say especially where you're more experienced, it's not necessarily the technical support that you need, but it's having somebody that understands how the APC works and how you can fit into that. So it's a lot about structure, being able to talk about your experience and those very specific things to the way that the RICS APC assessment works. You don't have to have a supervisor. This is just somebody who might be a line manager at work and who can then also be there to kind of support you through the process. And realistically, your assessors, so your submission is the basis of the interview. So the better you make that, the easier it is for your assessors to work with you and give you an environment to be able to explain your experience and pass one. I also briefly just mentioned your employer. If you work in a firm without any chartered surveyors, you can still get qualified. If you run your own block management company, or if you're self-employed, it is not a barrier. It may be that you have to look elsewhere for a counsellor. And I think on the next slide, I'll give you some tips for how to do that. Some employers will pay for you to go through the APC, others won't. So I'd say it's worth checking your employment contracts. There also might be, as Annie mentioned, a contribution to training or CPD that's worth looking into. Oh yeah, you can click through those. Finding a counsellor. Ideally, it'll be somebody within your firm who's or FRICS, but I appreciate, you know, you could be the first person going to get qualified, and that won't necessarily be possible. Often we find that you can speak to somebody, you know, if you work with a firm of chartered surveyors, or you know somebody who is a chartered surveyor in another firm, you could ask them to be a counsellor. It's also worth looking at RICS MRICS, who are local regional bodies run by chartered surveyors for kind of early career stage professionals or APC candidates. There'll be lots of chartered surveyors there, or people you might be able to get in contact with to talk about being a counsellor. We as Property Elite provide counsellors where we work with people for an ongoing basis on mentoring. And the really important thing to think about, whether you're looking at somebody in your firm, another firm, or off the RICS mentor list, that being a counsellor isn't just a signature. It's a commitment to kind of work with somebody throughout the process. And at the end, it's not just a tick box, because as a counsellor, you're saying that this person is of the standard to go forward. So it's actually a really, really important decision that we have to make. Sometimes we find that people agree to be counsellors but don't necessarily follow through, you know, not recognising the level of support that's required. So it's worth having that upfront conversation with your potential counsellor right at the outset, you know, clarify, this is what I need from you, can you give it me? And then they also have to undergo some online training with RICS before they can enter that role. So this is a real challenge sometimes to find somebody, but there are really good options out there to find somebody who'll effectively make your life a lot easier. So it's just worth mentioning that RICS have introduced a new assessment platform that effectively should make it very, very easy when you come to submit. They use an online system where you upload your documents and then click a button to submit. They previously had lots of problems with different systems, but these should have been ironed out and made very easy for you, you know, if you're thinking about doing the APC going forward. There's not much point in me actually talking to you about the changes, because you won't know necessarily what happened before, but it's really just, there is some good guidance on the RICS website to just make sure you know how and actually when to submit from the outset. The RICS have set windows each year when you can submit. Generally, they're each 6 months, and the different dates for prelim review, senior professional, and the other APC route. So triple checking the date is really, really important. This is just one more thing that's worth thinking about at the outset. So you obviously have a counsellor to sign you off. You also need 3 other chartered surveyors, at least one that is outside of your firm, who basically give a character reference for you. It's worth thinking about these before you submit, because you can't submit without the signatures. So again, if you don't work with any chartered surveyors, it's worth going along to a local matrix event, you know, a local property networking event that you probably already go to, and just saying to somebody who is chartered, is this something that you consider doing for me? And actually doing that earlier on will save you a bit of a headache later on. So touching on the interview before we take some questions, the interview is strictly 60 minutes and it's held online, not in person. It always starts with a 10-minute presentation on your case study, or if you're a senior professional, on your career history. Your assessors will then ask you about your case study and then about your wider submission, ending with a section of questioning primarily on ethics. The only area for an automatic referral is ethics. So above anything else, it's really, really important to get that right. And the basis of that questioning will be on your submission. So you need to know the submission inside out, and you also need to know your kind of wider knowledge, you know, justifying maybe why you gave advice, you know, the legislation, if you've got a statutory compliance issue in block management, and be able to answer those questions out loud. Next slide. As part of it, you do need to give a presentation on the case study. So I'd say think of this like a client pitch with a really nice visual aid to accompany it. something that you can refer to but doesn't take over or distract from the presentation. And strangely, the real key here is the 10-minute mark, that we tend to ask you finish between 9 minutes 45 and 10 minutes 15. So it's one of those really strict client requirements that you need to adhere to. If you are going through this, we have a template on our website you can use to adapt for the case study. But you may have already done lots of client pictures that you can take, good visuals, limited text, really clear images to bring into your visual aid. Next slide. Senior professional is slightly different. You still have a 10-minute presentation, but the 50 minutes after that are more of a wider discussion about your role and responsibilities. The bottom right here shows you how we assess you, and actually a good bulk of this is about you as a senior professional, but also you as a role model, whether it's leading a team, distilling this is how we do things, this is best practice, and also ethics in a wider sense. So the senior professional interview is different to your more standard APC process. The assessment criteria, so when you go through the interview, we make a decision based on that. It's not a separate assessment of the written work. We're looking for good communication, explanation of the advice in your examples, and that you're a safe pair of hands. The APC is not an exam, so there's not a written theory test or anything like that. We do need to see really good knowledge, but to an extent, we don't expect you to know everything. And if we flip to the next slide, here I've kind of put some ways that you can answer questions that you don't know the answers to. And I'd say it's exactly the same as dealing with a client, in that you need to know everything about what you're doing. So if you put an example in, you need to know about it. Same as a client meeting. If you didn't know about the block that you're managing, the client's likely to have a problem. If it's something that's outside your scope of competence, maybe if it's a defect that you need to refer to a building surveyor, absolutely you can say that. Equally, if we're in a client meeting and we can't quite remember the answer, we can refer to guidance or where the client should go for advice. It might be something that you can't remember and you need to come back to in the APC at the end of the interview, or with the client who'll be following up by email afterwards. So there are lots of different ways that you can deal with those really challenging questions, and the interview shouldn't be something to be afraid of. It's just something that you need to prepare for.
I think that's all really good advice there. I mean, particularly when you're saying about it, I found if I could remember the name of all of the different books, the RICS books and the RICS guidance, that's where I went to, rather than actually knowing it inside out. And what I said was, that's not in my remit. So where I would go for this answer is the RICS Red Book, or sort of those sorts of snippets of information, which meant I do know a level of knowledge, but I can't give advice on it. And they want to see that, don't they? They don't mind that you don't know.
Absolutely. And I think actually your comment there about the Red Book, it could be, I can't give advice on that valuation issue, but I know where you'd find it, and I can refer you to the person who would be able to give you that advice. We'll skip over this slide actually, just for the purposes of today. So actually, I will mention hot topics briefly, in that there's so much going on at the moment in block management. Things like fire safety, cladding, EWS1 forms, changes to the building regulations, interest rates, the list absolutely goes on. You'll find some really good information obviously on News on the Block, the RICS website, wider property press, and it's essential to know these for the APC. And actually I just think as a good professional, you'll know what's going on. I don't know, how do interest rates for inflation impact your client? That could impact a service charge and actually the cost that you need to recharge. It could be rental levels, it could be the cost that contractors are charging you for specific work. So that wider appreciation will really help you in the APC. Relating to hot topics, if we flick to the next slide, on our Property Elite website, we've got loads of free resources, so a blog, podcast, YouTube videos, ebooks and templates. With the weekly blog, goes through lots of hot topics, and you'll find some helpful residential information on there, including things like the new RICS guidance on high-rise buildings and valuation. There's loads of really interesting things on there. We also provide a free 15-minute consultation. If after today you think the APC looks like something you'd like to do feel free to book in, and we can give you some really specific advice on the right route for you. We then can provide individual paid support, and we also provide training to lots of big firms where they say, come in and we'll train your candidates or team. Some of our training is more general CPD as well. So we come in and train, it could be on a specific fire safety topic and things like that. So we do some very specific training as well. This slide just gives you an idea of how we help through the APC. So things like reviewing submissions, question packs, mock interviews, and then individual one-to-one mentoring. And I think that rounds off what I've got to say, unless Annie has anything else to mention for now before we take some questions.
No, I think we'll go to questions, Ava, just for the time. Have a look. Do you to start with?
I'll go through them if you want. Yeah, so Simon said, you're looking at the senior professional route, 10 years experience. Do you have examples of these? Yes, Simon, actually, if you were to email me directly, I've got a redacted senior professional submission that I can send to you to have a look at. So if you use the email on the side here, Jen@Property Elite, I'll be very happy to send that.
I'd happily share my senior professional one as well, if that helps. I think that I had other people's submissions. I worked within a business that had 3 or 4 people going at the same time. It's just reading it and understanding what they're looking for sometimes, which really helps you then write your own. So yeah, I'd happily share. If anybody wants mine, they can just reach out to me.
Brilliant. Dan mentions trying to find a mentor. And Dan, I think if you go back to the bit that I was talking about finding a counsellor, exactly the same thing applies. I think if you're looking for a mentor, they should still be M or F RICS. If they're not, they just won't have that appreciation of the process. So yeah, I'd say the same advice applies there. We've then got somebody who's asking about the pre and you're on the pre-2018 pathway. Fine. So the difference between pre-2018 and post-18, mandatory competencies, you get an extra one, and there's a little bit of difference in some of the competency titles and the content. I tend to think if you're pre-18, don't move over because you have less mandatory competencies to undertake, so it makes your life slightly easier.
Do they submit on the new platform though, if they're pre-2018?
Yeah, so it's exactly the same submission process. You just put pre or post, and then you'll be assessed on the correct pathway. Jordan said, is a relevant degree only an RICS accredited degree? So for the purposes of the APC, it's very specific that it's RICS accredited or not. When you're looking at relevant, either in the sense of associate RICS, that doesn't have to be RICS accredited. And I think that's also different for senior professional in that it says relevant, not RICS accredited. So it depends on what you're specifically looking at.
Jordan, if you're maybe you could add another little bit on that and let us know if that doesn't answer.
Terence, you found the right guide to download. Yes is the answer. And Elizabeth, your employer can be a counsellor as long as that person is M or F RICS. RICS are problems with submitting for SPA. When you submit, it's absolutely fine if you've got the 10 years experience and no degree. It should be a Word document form that you're filling out. So you can just put not applicable in the education section, say you don't have a degree. Then we have a question on competencies. It is correct that you must do valuation, measurement, and inspection. I'd say for the others, it can be really confusing to work out what levels for what competencies. So I would literally download the pathway guide, print it out, and then just tick off and write down the competencies, and you'll be able to triple check it on that. We've then got a question about entry options for non-degree associate RICS. If you're eligible for another route, I'd just get on with it rather than waiting. We've been waiting for maybe about 5 years now for an answer. So if you are eligible under another route, I'd just use that rather than waiting. Elizabeth, I don't have a degree. Yeah, I would definitely look at associate RICS. It's a great qualification, and then have a look at what happens for the non-degree APC route to come out. Yeah, I'd really recommend looking at associate.
Just on that point, Elizabeth, to do the associate RICS, it is an online ethics test, which you can do, and you get as many, am I right saying you get as many goes as you want, Jen? You do, don't
yes, you do.
It took me a while.
Me too, I think. Claire worked as a sales negotiator before block management. Yes, you definitely can, as long as it's relevant to residential. If it's, you know, a different part of residential, no issue. So as long as it's, yeah, it could be sales negotiator, I think that's absolutely fine. Danny, would you be better to go FM pathway or block management? So that's really FM or residential. I'd say download both pathways and look at the technical competencies to choose from. Let's say you are an FM, you'll probably be able to tick off more in FM than residential. That's probably the answer for you, but I'd just say look at both of them, tick them off, and go for the one that you've got the most experience to record against and most recent experience. And then the last question on the, we've got another, okay, so Priyanka, already enrolled in residential. Oh, it's not a question, that's even better. Debbie, 14 years property management experience. If you're in a senior managerial role, senior professional, if you don't have a degree, at the moment, I think you'd be looking at associate, because you would need that degree to look at the APC. Claire has a master's degree that's accredited and over 10 years experience. Actually, you'd be looking at what RICS call non-structured training. So because you've got over 10 years experience, you completely drop that structured training requirement. Louise, you have 5 years experience in a senior role and 10 in property management in general. I think that looks like senior professional would be a great fit for you. I'd say download the candidate guide off the RICS website and have a read, but that sounds like it would be a nice fit.
And with the senior professional, you do submit your CV and then they accept whether you're going to go down that route or not. So it's not like you have to go all the way down the entire process before you get to work out whether they think that your experience is relevant enough for that route. Is that fair, Jen?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, there's no reason why you can't have a go and see what they say. We've got another question here about IRPM. This is something that I just need to check on the exact qualification for associate. I think it's M, isn't it?
Yeah, you do need to be, because I was involved with the connection through to RICS, you do need to be MIRPM before you can apply for ASSOT RICS. But if you've got that 20 years experience, then you should contact IRPM about how to achieve that MIRPM.
Lovely. Emily's asked about the residential pathway. Questions around estate agency would really only come in if you select, let's say, purchase or sale and leasing and letting as a competency. So the questioning will be based about the competencies that you submit on. Debbie has a BA in politics, and if I scroll up, you would be looking at a preliminary review with your BA. Charlotte, associate without a degree and 5 years experience. If you're in a senior role, you'd need 10 years without a degree. Otherwise, if you're not in a senior role, you'd need to be just waiting for RICS to release that new information on a different route, or it's that study hours progression. But so you basically have to go to university and find the modules to do the study hours, which can be challenging.
Yeah, so that I know College of Estate Management can do some of those, but also, Charlotte, I recommend that you subscribe to Property Elite so that you make sure that you're getting the information from them. So when RICS does release it, Jen will send out an update on that. Subscribe to find out a bit more about that as well.
Yeah, good point. Joey is the next question. 8 years block experience, associate 2 years, senior role. Yeah, I think senior professional with the 2 years is probably your best bet. Danny, at 19, yeah, so I just contact our ICS to check that. They can usually just go back through degrees that they've accredited and let you know. And then we've Jake, a non-accredited degree in a senior position, 100% senior professional. If you're in a senior role, it will always be senior professional that's probably the most suitable for you.
All right, I think that's us. Oh, we've got one last one, then that's us. So
Yeah, you can answer the last one, that's fine.
Sarah, 7 years experience. I would say you'll be looking at prelim review, that's easier to say, with over 5 years experience and a non-RICS accredited degree.
Before you jump in, I just want to summarise to everyone. I really hope that today has kind of given you a bit more inspiration to perhaps start your MRICS journey. It's not as difficult as it sometimes is set out as for block managers to achieve those, and that valuation and measurement, don't let that be a blocker for you. Reach out to Jen. There's that 15-minute free consultation that you can use, and I would strongly recommend using her in a more extended route as well to support you through that. And the difference of having somebody that you're paid to support you rather than somebody who's doing it when they have some time will mean that you achieve that MRICS much quicker, in my opinion. But we've got our details up there. If you need anything else, just let us know. Thanks, Jen.
Thank you both.
Thank you as well. Thanks everybody.
Thanks both for your time today. That was brilliant. I think it's going to help a lot of people, definitely. As I said, the recording will be sent later today. I'll also make sure that Annie and Jen's contact details are both on there for everyone. And then we'll also arrange for a link to the slides to be sent. Otherwise, thank you everyone for joining us. And hopefully I'll see you all on the next webinar. Thanks, ladies. Thanks for your time again.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.